Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the first chapter in the book of James. We made it all the way up to the first 15 verses. We're going to cover this 16 all the way home through 27. James, the author, was the biological half-brother of the Savior, but he didn't quite call himself that. He identified as a servant or a slave, depending on the translation, of the Father and the Son. And he's writing to the dispersed diasporas. James, in his own life, he did struggle to accept his biological half-brother's messianic claim. James was the eldest born of Joseph and Mary, the virgin vessel through whom Yahshua was born. But Joseph also had fathered children through her after the incarnation, and he struggled to accept his messianic claim in his life, but he was converted. The conversion story we can read of in 1 Corinthians 15:7. He was a witness to the resurrection, and henceforth he was just on fire for the man he grew up with and lived next to, but couldn't quite fathom who he was. But he was fully convinced, and he is exalted to the rank of an apostle by the apostle Paul himself. But once more, he approaches his identity with humility. He considers himself a servant and a slave, even though he was the bishop of Jerusalem, which would have been the most prominent site and center of Christianity at the writing of this. My brothers, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the proving of your faith works endurance. How can we have joy in trials? Trials are not pleasant. They are necessarily not so, but we can have joy in the power of overcoming. Now, that word trial can ultimately... We speak of trials and tribulations, and the tribulations in our trials come to when we become. Another word for the word trial is that of testing. So we can have joy that we overcome, that we resist temptation and we're aware of it. But we can also, even the sins that we've stumbled into, we can look back with it with closure and perspective and see where it went all wrong. And we can have joy in, not in our trials or persecutions, but not because of them, but that is to say, in spite of them. So we have the counterintuitive mindset that knows that our character is being molded and refined and developed, improving ourselves spiritually. The proving of your faith works endurance. Endurance is absolutely necessary to run the race and to finish the race. Verse 5 and 6, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of Elohim, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it shall be given to him. But he shall ask in belief, not doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. If the mark and measure of prayer is praying that which is consistent or commensurate with the will of the Father, then wisdom is a righteous prayer. He wants us to be wise. This is something that he wills us to have, but we have to ask. And the trick and secret to wisdom is the humility that approaches the omniscient one, who will not deny. He will not only not deny, but he will shower abundantly on that which you ask. So this is one of the prayers where ask and you shall seek and you shall find, ask and you shall receive, knock and it shall be open. He will not deny this request, and he will satisfy it beyond our capacities and superabundance to even intuit or imagine. But how we ask is central. We have to ask in faith, not doubting. So if we don't believe what we say, then what we're saying isn't true, and it won't become true. But if we do believe what we're saying is true, then it will come true and come to pass. So you have to actually believe. Faith is foundational to wisdom. Without wisdom, there is no, there's worldly wisdom and carnal wisdom, but that's not really wisdom. James is talking about the divine wisdom, and he compares the presence of doubt to a sea at storm, all the chaos and commotion. It's just uncontrollable, and it's just waving back to and fro. And he also laments the double-minded effect that it produces, making a man unstable in all of his ways. But he advises the lowly to boast in their exaltation and the rich in their humiliation. And then he says this in verse 11, but the sun rose with burning heat and withered the grass, and its flower fell, and its pretty appearance perished. So also the rich man shall fade away in his ways. We read in verse 17, in the range we're going to cover today, the unchangeable and immutable Elohim, who does not vanish or decay. But the rich, as beautiful as there's a lot of beauty in the life of privilege and in the life of affluence and in the life of plenty, but it does eventually and inevitably end. And much as there's beauty in the flower, but it's only here for a season, it withers and vanishes away. And this life is as a vapor, as he eventually describes it. So we have a contrast between the unchanging, immutable, and eternal Elohim and our frail, finite selves, mortal. mortal men. Blessed is the man who endures trial, for when he has been proved, he shall receive the crown of life, which the Master had promised to those who love him. This answers even more fully what I said earlier about how can we have joy in our trials. It's because we are not working our way, but we are on the path to salvation. There's no such things as works by salvation, but trials are necessary, to prove us and to refine us, and we have to prove ourselves and be tested in the line of fire in order to be approved in heaven. But the crown of life, that anytime we read the word crown, that has salvific connotations. So the life is the life without end, the eternal life in heaven, and this is rooted in the promise. But the promise is only efficacious for those who love him. Let no one say when he is enticed, I am enticed by Elohim, for Elohim is not temptable by evil, and he entices no one. In the divine demonic division of labor, Elohim tests us, but Satan tempts us. Elohim tests us because he loves us, so he does. Satan is not a free agent. He is almost at the mercy of his sovereign behest and permission, so he can only act in accordance to the parameters that are prescribed by God. But he does tempt everyone. He has about 50 million demons running around the world right now tempting people, but he himself does not tempt, and he always provides a way out. So it is necessary that we be tempted in order to bring ourselves closer to him. But each one is enticed when he is drawn away by his own desires and trapped. So we cannot blame God when we fall. We cannot say he made us this way, because ultimately we are individually accountable and responsible for the agency that he gave us. So if we are enticed, that means we let sin have its way with us, and this is rooted in our own desires, which have sinful potential, what we desire, what we covet, what we want. And that is a trap, a dead-end trap that leads to death, as we read in the next verse. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it has been accomplished, brings forth death. Read of a threefold formula in the chain reaction of sin. It begins with desire. That's when we're temptable, because we want what is forbidden. This desire is not a neutral desire, but one that conceives, gives birth to sin, and the wages and the consequences and the connection of sin is death, and this is as sure as life. So sin does lead to death. We can read of the same thing in Romans 6:23. The wages of sin is death, but the free gift is eternal life in Yahshua Messiah. Verse 16, lesson itself. Do not go astray, my beloved brothers. The potentiality and the reality of the full fierceness of the apostasy which awaits us at the end times, in which the Master frankly foretold and warned that the full fierceness of these apostates will compel, if it were possible, to lead us astray or deceive the very elect. So what does that tell us? That we can be deceived at any time. So this warning is always appropriate and always necessary. And he offers it in love, and he calls the one to whom he offers this brothers. So he is writing to an immediate audience, but he is also writing to us. He is writing to posterity. And the Jerusalem church, they weren't a perfect church. They certainly weren't as problematic as the Corinthian one, but they did fall into ruinous debt through no fault of their own when a famine during the reign of the Emperor Claudius, who reigned from till 54 BM, struck, and they were dependent and reliant on them. But it was the capital center and city of Christianity until Antioch eclipsed it, and then Ephesus, and then Rome. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no change, nor shadow of turning. Every gift, we read of one of those gifts earlier, wisdom. Wisdom comes above, and James does speak of the wisdom that comes below, and an antithetical juxtaposition to the wisdom which comes from above. So this good gift, and it is a perfect gift. His good gifts are good because he is good. He is a giver because he is generous, and he gives liberally and generously to those who love him. But he is an unchanging being, so even the lights, the Father of lights means the creator of the heavenly stars, the ones which light up the heavens, they all change, they all eventually explode and perish, but he is unchanging. And as a perfect being and an eternal being, it is literally impossible for him to either be added a single iota or subtracted even that amount from him. He, as a perfect being, he is not subjectable to improvement or degeneration, because the to speak of improving him would to admit some imperfection. So there is no shadow of turning. That means his yes means yes and his no means no. We can trust him. What he says, his word is binding. It is as binding in the first century as it is in the 2 millennia BC, before it came that, and it's as binding to the 2 millennia after it. So then, my beloved brothers, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. This is a formula for peaceful conversation. Now, listening is half the equation in any conversation, but just something about the human nature measures conversations, the qualities thereof, by what they speak in it. But, there's a lot of value in listening, and listening, we can learn from listening. We can't really learn from talking. We can try to teach, but if we are not swift to hear, we have to hold our tongue, say the right word at the right time, and when it is used most effectively. To be sparse with your words, talk when necessary, but listen, pay attention to your conversational counterpart, just because, they're half of the equation. It's not all about you. So if you want to go along, and the danger is if you are prone to wrath or fast to wrath, if you have a lightning quick draw McGraw anger trigger, then you will you'll just be speaking and going at life 180 miles an hour. So that's something you don't want to do. For the wrath of man does not work righteousness of Elohim. His wrath is righteous because he is righteous. He is intrinsically so. That means everything he is and everything he does is righteous. So when he does resort to wrath, it's never without a good reason. Sodom and Gomorrah completely got what they deserve. Just to give one example, and the sinners at the final judgment, the unrepented sinners, they're going to get what they have coming to them. But one of the ways that we can earn the wrath is by being prone to wrath. Wrath is something best left to divinity, and he has the right to be angry with his lost and fallen and wayward creatures in creation. But we our problems in perspective, there's really seldom any need to get anger is an emotion we do well to avoid, not only because it's unpleasant, but also because it's destructive to both ourselves. It's self-destructive, and it's destructive to those around us. Life is lived a lot. The quality of life is going to increase, manifold, multiply if you learn to not be so angry over every little thing, not to take every slight personally. But just take it in stride and take it with perspective and move on with this. And don't sweat the small stuff. Someone cuts you off in traffic. That's not a license or legitimate pretext to just curse at them and give them the middle finger out the window. Because remember, we have to be mindful and cultivate. Now, the wrath is going to come at the judgment, and we who are saved will be spared from the wrath of his judgment. So that's the side we want to be on. Therefore, put away all filthiness and overflow of evil, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your lives. Now, these two steps are in order for a reason. We have to purify ourselves and decontaminate ourselves of all the pollutants, all the spiritual pollutants, the sins, the temptations, the lust that prompt us, that are our weaknesses. We have to get rid of them in as much as we are able in order to make room for our heart, because if this stuff is in our heart, there's going to be no room for the word to lay its seed and blossom and grow if that stuff is clouding in them. So a sinful heart is not going to appreciate or appropriate or apply the word. It has to be implanted. It has to take root. These words are more than words on the pages. These are words of life. And we have to, in order to give them life, we have to cultivate the soil of our heart, get rid of all the weeds, all the rocks, all the contaminants, all the obstacles, because, this word has the power to save our lives, and it is the plan and path to salvation unveiled for our benefit. And become doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. Hearing, now, we can equally say reading, but James is actually the earliest chronological written work of the New Testament. So by this time, this is around 45 AD. Prior to this point, Christianity would have been an exclusively oral tradition. They would have heard from speakers like him. But the blessing and the benefit does not come from sitting through a sermon or sitting in a Bible lesson, but going out in the world and doing what you learn, translating what you learn, learning and living doctrine and duty and revelation and responsibility are artificial barriers. The Bible observes no such thing. So we have to be not only hearers of the word, but doers. And this has a parallel in Romans 2:13. Paul says much the same thing, albeit in different words, but there is such a thing as an all-talk, no-action politician, and there too is an all-talk, no-action, the ones who like to parade with prayers in public in Matthew 6 verses. These are the lips. So if you are, if you listen to religion and listen to sermons, you can speak the speak and talk the talk, but it's the walking and the walk that proves and solidifies your faith. Because if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in the mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and immediately forgets what he was like. So in the word is a mirror, which is a revelation of our sin condition and also a magnifying glass for the magnificence of the sinless one. But the natural face, now our natural face, the natural man is an enemy, an alien, an opponent, and stranger of God. So our natural face, now the word is a two-edged sword which cuts through the root to the heart and the discerners of the spirits and motivations of men. Hebrews 4:12. So in that we have a mirror through which we gauge our own condition, and if we are living differently than what we are learning, then it's not going to click to the sinner who's determined to get away with it. They're going to forget it. So they look, they don't like what they see, they turn away from the sight. It's unpleasant to look at. They see their ugliness, the ugliness of sin, warts and all, imperfections are laid here. And that's why the sinner does not, this book will keep you away from sin, but sin will keep you away from this book. So we have to embrace the mirror image of ourselves, warts and all. Some passages scream with conviction to me, as I imagine they do to others. So read every word, start to finish. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of Yahweh. Deuteronomy 8:3, Matthew 4:4, Luke 4:4. But he that looked into the perfect Torah, that of freedom, and continues in it, not becoming a hearer that forgets, but a doer of work, this one shall be blessed in his doing. Now, James is writing to a predominantly Jewish audience. The Jewish people were still the majority in Christianity in 45 AD. It's not really till Paul launches on his missionary journeys that it becomes a more predominantly Gentile faith. So the law would have been a source of freedom. Now Paul speaks of being liberated from the bondage, the yoke, the slavery of the Torah in Galatians. So, but the Torah is a source of refuge for the Christian, and also one of liberty. One way of looking at the Torah, the laws of Moses, is just a bunch of rules. There's no liberty in rules, but it does set us free from our own sinful impulses. But looking to the law itself is the mirror which can expose the sin, but it is not the cleansing agent that can regenerate the heart. So we have to. James is also accused somewhat, rather unfairly of promoting a works by salvation, and some of this distortion is evident even in scholars as prominent as Martin Luther. But he's not. He's just saying that works is not the condition of our salvation; is the fruit thereof. And if we want to be saved, we have to be living as saved people. And we can do that by finding liberty and obedience. Paradoxically, this is the counterintuitive mindset, the same one that takes joy in trials and testings and tribulations and persecutions. But the blessing comes in doing the word. You can hear it, you can read it, but it's ultimately doing it. It's living it out in your daily lives out there in the world. So you read it, you heed it, you learn it, you live it, you love it. And the more you love it, the more you will live it, and the more you will learn it. So it's an experiential knowledge, doing righteousness, doing works, that can be only increased and expanded upon the foundation by actually getting out there and doing things, putting this religion into practice. And James closes this chapter with commentary on the nature of true and phony religion. If anyone amongst you thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is worthless. Religion is a dangerous word. It's a term of derision even in circles of religion. We tend to avoid that word. We prefer the more palatable euphemism of being in the business of relationships, not religion. But there is such a thing, and the potentiality of religion to be corrupted by hypocritical men is a very real and present danger. And one of the ways they do this is not by governing their tongue. And James does expound on this theme most fully in the 3rd chapter when he compares the human tongue to an untamable beast that issues curses when it can issue blessings in the 10th verse of that chapter. But if you're now, this is the lip service religion. Now, if you say the right things in prayer in public, but then you go home and you cuss your kids and wife and husband, then there's something insincere and hypocritical in the walk of your talk, and your religion is nullified in vain. So why all this emphasis on language? Because words have power. Words have healing potential. They also have harmful potential. We can build up, we can build down, we can edify, we can uplift, we can heal, or we can destroy, malign, injure, and hurt people actually with words. So one of the marks, not the only mark, of a truly religious person is integrity in speech. 27th and final verse. Clean and undefiled religion before the Elohim and Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their afflictions, to keep oneself unstained from the world. So pure religion, now religion as we know it is corrupted and polluted and maligned. Just look at all the religious, organized religion in the world. There is nothing pure or undefiled. It is in fact polluted, and the corruption stinks and emanates between, the Catholic Church and even the Mormon Church hoarding $100 billion. You're serving mammon. But, not to single that, even outside of Christianity, there's much that goes on in the name of religion that is quite frankly appalling. But the religion that counts, the religion that matters, the one that pleases, the ostensible objective of our religion, Elohim the Father, he notices and he takes delight and he takes joy and he takes notice when we visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. Now, without a father or a husband, orphans and widows would have been bereft of any male protection. They would have had no security. They would have had now no means of livelihood. So the Mosaic Law, even though it was theoretically inclined to exercise impartiality towards them and justice towards them, they often went neglected. That's just the reality of the world. It doesn't mean that the Hebrews were horrible people. It just means that they were human beings. So every justice system is corrupted and perverted to a system of injustice in most countries. But the final thing he closes on is to keep oneself unstained from the world. So clean and undefiled, and if we want to be clean and undefiled, we cannot be stained, so we must also be unstained in the world. The polluting proximity, just the spiritual contamination of all that it is and all that it has to offer and everyone in it. The world is the domain of Satan. He is the god of this world, and most people in the world, he is their god. So we got to stay away from the world and its trappings. This is not to endorse an extremist interpretation of the doctrine of separation, one that suggests that we should be isolationist. We should, be concerned for their welfare and reach out, but not without tainting ourselves. So we got to be wise as snakes and gentle as doves, to be in the world and remain above it and apart it, and go out there and actually blur people in away from the world into the world that awaits. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.